They didn't just leave her to die. They watched through satellite feeds through encrypted terminals on a humming in a climate-controlled room. Harold Stennett's men tracked the wreckage and confirmed the body was still floating. One of them laughed. "Let the ocean do the paperwork," he said. They closed the feed. They poured drinks. They believed it was over. They were wrong about everything. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end. You will not believe where this goes. The North Atlantic Ocean does not forgive. That is not a figure of speech. That is physics. That is biology. That is the kind of brutal, indifferent mathematics that naval officers study in survival training, so they can understand with clinical precision exactly how long a human body can function in water cold enough to stop a heart. The answer in water temperatures hovering just above freezing is somewhere between 30 minutes and 90 minutes of meaningful consciousness. After that, the muscles begin to fail. The blood retreats from the extremities and rushes toward the core organs in a last desperate act of preservation. The fingers stop working. The arms stop working. The mind begins to drift. After 2 hours, a person in those waters is almost certainly dead. After 3 days, there is no medical protocol for 3 days. There is no survival story. There is no case study written in any military manual that accounts for a human being remaining alive after 72 hours of exposure in the winter North Atlantic. Which is exactly why Lieutenant Commander Derek Callahan's hands went completely still on the armrest of the rescue helicopter the moment his pilot's voice crackled across the headset. "Sir," a pause. The kind of pause that means something is wrong with the words before they arrive. "You need to look at the water." Derek pressed his face to the side window. He saw the wreckage first. A section of hull maybe 12 ft long riding the surface at an angle. Gray against gray, ocean against sky. Just another piece of debris in a search quarter that had already yielded nothing except cold water and a disappointment. Then he saw her. "Bring us down," Derek said. His voice was quiet, almost calm. The kind of calm that happens when the brain refuses to process what the eyes are reporting. "Sir, the temperature reading says I know what the temperature reading says. Bring us down." The helicopter dropped altitude. Derek reached for the intercom connecting him to Grant Holloway, his rescue swimmer, seated near the rear door in a wet suit that could handle temperatures the ocean would use to kill a man in 40 minutes. Grant already suiting up. "Commander," that was Holloway. 18 years with the Naval Special Warfare community. He had pulled people from wreckage in 3 different oceans and one very bad river in a country whose name he still didn't say out loud in public. He had never once hesitated at a jump. He hesitated now. Not because of the cold, not because of the distance, because of what he was looking at through the open door as the helicopter hovered 40 ft above the surface. The woman was on her back. Her face was tilted slightly upward, pale as bone. Her hair spread dark and flat against the broken hull section beneath her. Her clothing was soaked through and frozen at the edges. Her lips had the particular grayish-blue color that every survival medic learned to recognize as a color that means you are probably too late. In her hands locked against her chest with both arms wrapped tight around it. The way a person holds something they have already decided to die protecting was a rifle. Commander Holloway said his voice had changed. "She's got a weapon. I can see that." "What's the protocol on the protocol is you go in and you bring her back." Derek said the rifle comes with her. "Do not attempt to separate them." "Do you understand me?" A beat of silence. "Yes, sir." Holloway went in. The moment he hit the water, he said later, was like being punched by the entire ocean simultaneously. Every exposed inch of skin registered a temperature that the human nervous system interprets as pain, because the nervous system understands that this is not an environment where human beings are meant to be. He reached the wreckage in under 2 minutes. He reached for her and her eyes opened. Holloway stopped moving. He would describe it later in the debrief sitting in a heated room with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, and he would choose his words carefully because Holloway was not a man who used dramatic language. He would say her eyes opened and she looked at me. Not the way someone looks at you when they're confused or hypothermic or half-conscious. She looked at me the way you look at something when you're deciding whether or not it's a threat. He said it took approximately 2 seconds. He said those were 2 of the most uncomfortable seconds of his professional life. "I'm Navy," he said. He said it out loud there in the freezing water, treading in a survival suit while she stared at him from the wreckage. "I'm here to get you out. You're going to be okay." She didn't speak. She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she let him take her. She never let go of the rifle. He didn't try to make her. They brought her aboard, and the crew chief immediately began emergency warming protocols. MIAR blankets, heated oxygen, a check for vital signs at the medic. A young petty officer named Tors ran twice because the first set of numbers made him think his equipment was malfunctioning. Her core temperature was low, critically low by any standard measure, but her pulse was steady. Her blood pressure was reduced but not absent. Her pupils responded to light. She was alive in a way that made no medical sense. 3 days, Tors kept saying almost to himself as he worked. 3 days. Derek stood near the far wall of the helicopter cabin and watched the woman in the rifle and said nothing for a long time. The rifle was unlike anything he had seen before. He had been around weapons his entire adult life. He had handled military-issue precision rifles across 3 branches of service in 2 allied nations. He knew what a sniper system looked like. He knew what custom work looked like. He knew the difference between a weapon that had been modified by a skilled armorer and a weapon that had been designed from the beginning with a specific singular purpose in mind. This was the second thing. The stock was unusual. The barrel configuration was unusual. The scope mounting was unusual in a way that it suggested whoever had designed it was working from mathematical requirements rather than standard operational needs. The whole weapon had a quality that Derek could only describe privately as purposeful. Like every component had been selected not for convenience or availability, but for the achievement of something very specific. He wanted to know what that specific thing was. He also knew that wanting to know right now with a nearly dead woman wrapped in thermal blankets 10 ft away was exactly the wrong priority. "Tors," he said, "what are we looking at medically?" "Honestly, sir." Tors paused. "I don't know, she should be dead." "I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm saying the numbers I'm seeing don't match 72 hours of ocean exposure at this temperature. Either she found shelter I'm not aware of, or she has a physiology I've never encountered, or he stopped, or what, or she survived on something that isn't in any manual I've read." Derek looked at the woman again. Her eyes were closed now. Her grip on the rifle had loosened fractionally but had not released. Even unconscious, she held on. He keyed his radio base. "This is Callahan. We have a survivor. Female, no identification, critical condition but stable. We have one unusual item of interest accompanying the survivor. Request immediate medical and security at the landing zone. And get me Farquharker." A crackle. "Commander, did you say no identification?" "That's what I said." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood. Ferrer will meet you at the pad." Dennis Ferrer was the kind of man who could look at a piece of mechanical equipment for 30 seconds and tell you things about it that would take most people 3 hours of research to discover. He had a mind that organized information the way other people organized furniture instinctively, efficiently, and always in a way that made sense the moment you saw the result. He was waiting at the landing pad when they touched down, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the medical team rush toward the helicopter with the expression of a man trying very hard to look calm and not quite succeeding. When they moved the woman to the stretcher, Ferrer got his first look at the rifle. He didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds. "Ferrer," Derek said, "I'm looking. What do you see?" Ferrer turned and met his eyes. "I see something that shouldn't exist." When he said, "And I mean that in the technical sense, Commander, not the emotional sense. I mean, this weapon should not exist because building it would require access to manufacturing capabilities and material specifications that are not publicly available and not officially linked to any program I'm aware of." Derek felt the thing he had been trying not to feel since the helicopter, a cold that had nothing to do with the Atlantic. "Can you get into it?" "I can try." Parker looked back at the rifle. But I want to tell you something first. In my experience, when someone holds a weapon like this with their last physical strength after 3 days in the ocean, they're not protecting the weapon. They're protecting what's inside it. Derek looked at him. Inside it, Ferrer nodded slowly. The stock configuration is wrong. There's added density where there shouldn't be any. Either this is the worst piece of custom work I've ever seen, or there's something built into the frame that isn't part of the weapon system. How long do you need? Give me 6 hours, maybe 8. You have 4, Derek said. And Farrer, no external systems, nothing worked, no reports going up the chain until I say so. This stays in the room. Farrer studied him for a moment. That's an unusual order, sir. It's an unusual situation. The medical team at the NATO facility in Iceland had seen a great many things in the course of their service. They had treated burns and blast injuries and conditions that resulted from human beings doing extraordinarily dangerous things in extraordinarily difficult environments. They were not, as a professional group, easily rattled. The woman they were now treating rattled them, not because of her injuries, though. Those were serious. Not because of her vital signs, though those remained inexplicably inconsistent with her reported exposure duration. What rattled the medical staff and what doctor? Anukika Senstam, the Fasil's lead trauma physician, would write about in careful, neutral clinical language in her preliminary notes, was the reaction the patient had when the nursing staff attempted to remove the rifle from her hands while she was unconscious. She woke up. Not gradually, not with the slow, confused surfacing of a person coming out of deep unconsciousness. She came awake the way a switch is thrown from completely still to completely aware, and her hands repositioned on the rifle before her eyes had fully focused. And she said one sentence in a voice that was quiet and destroyed from exposure and absolutely clear. "You don't touch that." Dr. Sean Stem, who had been standing at the foot of the bed reviewing charts, looked up. The woman was looking directly at her. "I understand, Doctor." Sean Stam said. She used the tone she had learned over 20 years of emergency medicine. The tone that communicates, "I am not your enemy, I am trying to help, I will not push, no one will touch it, you're safe." A long silence, "Where am I?" Iceland NATO Medical Facility. "You were found in the ocean." Something moved across the woman's face. Not relief, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either of those things. Something that looked to Dr. Soren Stam's clinical eye like calculation. "How long was I out there?" "We believe approximately 3 days, though I have to tell you." Senam paused. "I don't entirely understand how that's possible." The woman closed her eyes for a moment. She was still. "Then what day is it?" Sean Dam told her. Another silence. "Then he's dead. I'm sorry. Nothing." Her eyes opened again, flat, tired. "I need water." "Of course, and I know what you need," the woman said. She looked at the ceiling. "My name is Claire. That's all I'm telling you right now. Find whoever is in charge of my rescue. Tell him I'll talk to him. Only him." Soren Stam considered pushing, decided against it. She went to find Derek Callahan. Derek received the message and went immediately, though he stopped outside the door for a moment and thought about what Ferrer had said, about what it means when someone protects a weapon with their last strength, about what might be inside it. He pushed the door open. She was sitting up in the bed, which she should not have had the physical capacity to do given what her body had been through. The rifle was leaning against the wall beside her, and she was watching the door with the same quality of attention that Holloway had described. Not aggression, not fear, but evaluation. She was younger than he had expected. Mid-30s, dark hair, still damp from the ocean, eyes that had the particular quality of someone who has spent a great deal of time observing things and very little time being observed. "Commander Callahan," she said. "It was not a question. That's right." He pulled a chair close to the bed but didn't sit down yet. "And you're Claire for now. What does that mean?" "It means I have more names than I've needed in the past few years, and I haven't decided yet which one is actually mine." She looked at him steadily. "You ordered your team not to separate me from my weapon." "Yes." "Why should I?" Derek sat down. "Because whatever was worth holding on to for 3 days in the Atlantic is worth understanding before anyone touches it." Something shifted in her expression, barely perceptible, but it shifted. "That was a good call," she said quietly. "I've made worse." A pause stretched between them. Clear's throat outside the door, Derek could hear the institutional sounds of a medical facility. Footsteps, distant voices, the soft mechanical rhythms of monitoring equipment. "Your man," Claire said, "the one who came in after me. He was in the water with me for 4 minutes before he got me onto the cable." "Holloway, yes, tell him he has good eyes. He looked at me before he reached for me. Most people don't do that. Most people reach first and look later." A pause. "In my experience, the ones who reach first don't usually last long in situations that require reading people quickly." Derek looked at her. "You were evaluating my rescue swimmer in Arctic water with hypothermia." "Habit," she said simply. "Then your weapons specialist. Has he touched the rifle yet?" The question landed carefully without accusation, just information gathering. "He's been asked to examine it," Derek said under controlled conditions. "What has he found?" "I haven't heard yet," she nodded slowly. "You'll hear soon." She looked at the wall beside the bed where the rifle leaned. "When he tells you what he finds, I need you to come back here immediately. Don't discuss it with anyone else first. Don't send it up the chain, don't report it. Come directly to me." She looked back at him. "Can you promise me that?" Derek studied her. He thought about the order he had already given Farrer. Nothing reported stays in the room. He thought about the fact that he had given that order before she asked him to. "I already did," he said. "Another shift. This one more visible. Why you?" she asked. And for the first time, her voice carried something underneath the flatness. Something that sounded distantly like the echo of a person who had not expected that answer. "Because whatever you survived to protect," Derek said, "I don't think you did it to have the wrong people find out about it first." Claire Mercer looked at Lieutenant Commander Derek Callahan for a long moment. Then she said, "You pulled me out of the ocean, Commander. I'm going to try very hard to make sure that doesn't get you killed." The door opened. Tors looked in his face pale. "Sir," he said, "Farker needs you. He says you need to come right now." Derek stood. He looked at Claire. She was already looking at the rifle. "Go," she said quietly. "And Commander." He stopped at the door. She did not look at him when she spoke. Her voice was flat and precise and held no drama whatsoever. "Whatever number he shows you, whatever distance, it's real." Derek walked out. Behind him, in a room in a NATO medical facility on the edge of the Arctic, a woman who had spent 3 days in water that should have killed her. Leaned her head back against the pillow and breathed slowly and waited for the world to catch up to the truth she had already delivered. Somewhere in the facility, a weapons specialist named Farrer had just opened something he did not understand yet. And far to the south, in a climate-controlled building where men had poured drinks over the news of her death, the first electronic signal was already moving through the world's infrastructure like a ghost, quiet patient, and absolutely certain of where it was going. She had always known she would survive. She had planned for it. Every choice, every calculation, every second of those 72 hours holding that rifle above the freezing water while her body made its own desperate calculations about what it was willing to give up and what it was not. But had been built around one simple mathematical certainty. She was not finished, and somewhere embedded in an encrypted partition that no one had yet found an entire world of truths was waiting to be born. Derek walked fast, not running. Running draws attention, and attention was the last thing he wanted inside a facility full of people who asked questions for a living, but moving with the kind of controlled urgency that his body had defaulted to in tight situations for the better part of 2 decades. Tors kept pace beside him, saying nothing which told Derek more than words would have. Tors was 26 years old, and had the particular quality of young military medics who had seen enough to understand when silence was the appropriate response to a situation. The room Farrer had commandeered was a maintenance space near the back of the facility's secondary wing. Chosen Derek understood immediately, because it had no windows facing the main quarter, one entry point, and no network terminals. Exactly as instructed, Farrer had taken the order seriously. Derek pushed the door open. 3 members of his team were already inside. Petty Officer Reyes, who had 12 years in naval intelligence support before transferring to the recovery unit. Chief Martinez, who had spent the last 6 years attached to special operations units, and had the quiet, watchful quality of a man who had learned to process disturbing information without broadcasting his reaction. And Holloway, still in partial wetsuit gear, sitting in a metal chair with his elbows on his knees and his eyes fixed on the table at the center of the room. The rifle was on the table. Farrer was standing beside it. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He had the look of a man who had been working with intense focus for several hours and had just found something that temporarily stopped that focus entirely. "Close the door," Farrer said. Derek closed it. "Tell me." Farrer put both hands flat on the table. He looked at Derek the way a person looks at someone when they are choosing the most precise words available to them, because the imprecise ones would not do justice to what they have discovered. "The weapon itself," Ferreira began, "is unlike anything in any catalog I have access to. Snorts, the barrel is custom machined to tolerances that are not achievable with standard military manufacturing processes. The scope is a hybrid design, optical elements I recognize from 3 different high-end civilian manufacturers assembled into a configuration that shouldn't work as well as it clearly does. The trigger mechanism is hand-fitted. All of it. Who built it?" Derek asked. "Someone with access to resources that don't officially exist, and someone with a specific mission requirement in mind that drove every single design decision. This is not a rifle built for general use. This is a rifle built to do one thing at a distance no standard platform could achieve." Martinez shifted in his chair. "What distance?" Farrer didn't answer that yet. He reached under the table and picked up a laptop air-gapped. Derek noted "not connected to anything" and turned it so the screen faced the room. "The stock. Farrer said you were right about the density. There's a secondary compartment built into the base. Composite shell self-sealing designed to be waterproof to about 40 m of depth. Inside is an encrypted data module, Militarira encryption but non-standard. It took me 3 and 2 hours to crack the outer layer." "In the inner layer?" Derek asked. "Still working on that, but the outer partition, Commander, there are ballistic records in here going back approximately 4 years. Shot logs, every engagement she conducted, atmospheric data, wind calculations, environmental variables, target confirmation codes, mission records." Reyes leaned forward. "Confirmation codes from who?" "That," Farr said, "is an excellent question that I cannot yet answer because the issuing authority is referenced by a code designation I don't recognize. But whoever issued the missions had operational infrastructure. These aren't random engagements. These are tasked operations with pre-em mission intelligence, real-time support data, and post-mission confirmation protocols." The room absorbed this. Derek said, "How many engagements in the outer partition?" 17 confirmed operations over 4 years. Holloway looked up from his chair. 17? Yes, and nobody found her in 4 years. Farrer looked at him. Nobody was looking, or rather the people who knew what she was doing believed they controlled her completely. "She was their ass asset." "You don't surveil an asset, you direct them." Derek moved to the table. He looked at the laptop screen. Lines of data, coordinates, numbers, the dry, precise language of ballistic documentation, the kind of records that described extraordinary violence in the vocabulary of mathematics. Because mathematics does not flinch and does not editorialize and does not ask whether any of this was right or wrong. "Show me the last entry," he said. Farrer reached over and scrolled. He stopped. Derek read the screen. He read it once, then he read it again because the first reading produced a number that his brain refused to file correctly. He looked up at Farrer. "Is this accurate? I've verified it 4 times. Then say it out loud." Farrer straightened. He looked around the room at Martinez, at Reyes, at Holloway, still in his chair at Torres, and Atris near the door. He looked back at Derek, and then in the tone of a man who understood exactly what he was saying and had already processed his own reaction to it before everyone else arrived, he said, 4,112 m, 1 round, 1 confirmed kill. The atmospheric data shows a crosswind of approximately 22 kmh with variable gusts. The elevation differential between shooter position and target was M. Flight time of the projectile was 6-8 seconds. Nobody spoke. 6-8 seconds. Derek thought about what 6-8 seconds meant. He thought about a bullet leaving a barrel and climbing into the sky, and beginning its long arc downward, toward a target that was at the moment of firing nearly 2 miles away. He thought about every variable that existed between the moment of trigger pull and the moment of impact, the wind that could shift in any direction, the temperature changes affecting air density, the rotation of the Earth itself introducing a drift that required mathematical compensation, the heartbeat of the shooter, the breathing, the absolute stillness required in the body while the mind performed calculations that most ballistics computers struggled with. 6-8 seconds in the air. 1 round bong knives, 1 kill. The record, Martinez said quietly, not a question, a thought spoken aloud. The documented record, Farrar said, is significantly shorter. This distance exceeds any confirmed engagement in the historical record by over 400 m. Reyes stood up. He walked to the table and looked at the screen himself. He read the numbers. He stepped back. That's not possible, he said. The data says it happened, Farquhar replied. Data can be fabricated. This data can't. The environmental readings cross-referenced with meteorological records from the date in question. The atmospheric conditions documented in this log match the actual recorded weather at the coordinates listed. If someone fabricated this, they fabricated it using real weather data from 3 days ago, which means they fabricated it in the last 72 hours, which means it happened 3 days ago, Derek said. Yes. Derek looked at the screen again. At the coordinates of the target location, at the date, at the confirmation code indicating a successful mission. What's the target designation? He asked. Farrar was quiet for 1 beat. Then he reached over and pointed to a line on the screen. Derek leaned in and read it. His hand resting on the edge of the table stopped moving entirely. Say that name out loud, he said. Harold Sten, Farrar said. The room went very still. Harold Stennett, whose name appeared in defense contracting circles the way certain mountains appear on maps. Massive, unmovable, apparently permanent. Whose company held classified contracts across 3 government agencies. Whose personalist network included people whose names appeared on the kind of lists that required security clearances to access. Harold Stennett, who had died 3 days ago in what had been officially described in the preliminary reporting as a sudden medical event pending investigation. Pending investigation. Derek stood up straight. He looked at Farrar, then at Martinez, then at Holloway, who had risen from his chair and was standing now completely still with the expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the last several hours. He didn't have a medical event, Holloway said. No, Derek said he didn't, and the woman we pulled out of the ocean made the shot. Then someone destroyed her vessel. Derek paused and left her there because they thought Clear's throat, the ocean would handle it. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when a group of people who are professionally trained to handle difficult information simultaneously realize that the difficult information they are currently handling has implications that extend well beyond the walls of the room they are standing in. Rahia said who sent her after Stennett. I don't know yet. Farrar said the mission issuing authority is still behind the secondary encryption layer, who wanted her dead after she made the shot. That Derek said may be the same people who sent her, or it may be someone else entirely. Either way, they had the resources to locate her vessel at sea and destroy it within hours of the operation. He stopped. He thought about what Claire had said. Whatever number he shows you, whatever distance, it's real. She had known exactly what Farrar was going to find before they found it. I need to go back to her room, he said. Commander. Farrar's voice stopped him. There's something else. Derek turned. Farrar had that expression again, the one from the landing pad, the one that meant he was choosing precise words carefully, the outer partition of the data module. Farrar said it's clean. 17 mission records, complete documentation clearly organized, but the encryption structure tells me something about how the module was built. He paused. The outer partition isn't the whole module. There's more space inside, significantly more. And there's a second encryption layer protecting it. It's not the same as the first layer. The first layer I broke in 3 and won 2 hours. The second layer is different in a way that suggests it wasn't built by the same people who built the outer section. Derek stared at him. She built it herself. That's my best guess. Yes, whatever is in the inner partition, she put it there separately and she secured it with her own method. Parker looked at the rifle. The outer partition is the mission record. What an organized operation logs and keeps, but the inner partition is what she was collecting, Derek said quietly. Ferrer nodded. I think so. Yes. Derek's mind was moving fast, now organizing information the way he had been trained to organize it under pressure, not in sequence. But in relationship, understanding how each piece connected to every other piece, and what the shape of the whole thing looked like when you stepped back far enough to see it. A woman trained by an organization to conduct long-range operations directed at targets she was told were dangerous, working within a structure that provided mission intelligence, atmospheric support, and confirmation protocols. 17 operations over 4 years. Then something changed. She started collecting. She was building a case, Derek said, while she was still inside. She was working, following orders, maintaining operational cover, and simultaneously documenting everything she could reach. That would require extraordinary discipline, Martinez said. He was not arguing. He was acknowledging. Yes, Derek said it would. He thought about a woman who had survived 3 days in the North Atlantic by refusing to release a rifle that contained years of accumulated truth. He thought about the particular quality of stillness he had seen in her eyes. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of damage, but the stillness of someone who has made every calculation they need to make and is now simply waiting for the situation to catch up with their mathematics. Ferrer, he said, the inner partition, how Clear's throat longed to crack it, unknown. Could be hours, could be days, could be longer, depending on what method she used. He paused. But Commander, I think she could break it herself in about 30 seconds. I know, Derek said. Get the laptop, you're coming with me. He was halfway to the door when Rahia spoke. Sir, if Stennet is the target and the people who sent her also tried to kill her, that means there's an organization out there right now that thinks its shooter is dead. Its mission is complete, and its secrets are at the bottom of the Atlantic. Derek stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He looked at the closed door for a moment. Yes, he said. How long before they figure out she's not dead? He turned. He looked at Reyes. He looked at Martinez. He looked at Holloway, who had been in the water with her, who had seen her eyes open with that terrible clarity in the middle of the freezing ocean. Probably, Derek said. Less time we'd like. He opened the door. The corridor outside was quiet, institutional lighting, the distant, unremarkable sounds of a working military medical facility. Nothing out of place, nothing alarming, just a hallway full of ordinary details arranged in ordinary order. Derek walked through it and understood with the particular instinct that had kept him operational for 19 years that ordinary was about to end. He reached Claire's room. He knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer, because he had the sense that the kind of courtesy that waits for an answer was already a luxury this situation could no longer afford. She was sitting up. She had not moved the rifle from the wall beside her. She was looking at him as he entered, and then at Ferrer behind him with the laptop, and then back at Derek. And whatever she read in his face made her own expression shift in a way that looked almost like relief. The particular relief of someone who has been waiting for the people around them to catch up and has just watched it happen. 4112 M. Derek said he did not phrase it as a question. Yes, she said. Stennet. Yes, they tried to kill you after. Within 4 hours of confirmation, she said they knew where the vessel was. They always knew. I expected it. Derek felt something move through the room. He couldn't name it exactly. It was somewhere in the territory between respect and alarm, and it had sharp edges. You expected it, he repeated. I planned for it, she said. She looked at the rifle. The rifle is rated to float at the density of the composite stock. The whole section I landed on, I positioned myself on it before the explosion, not after. She looked back at him. I had approximately 14 seconds between the moment I understood the charge had been activated and the moment of detonation. That was enough. Ferrer made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when a mathematical truth arrives at a speed they were not quite prepared for. 14 seconds. He said it was sufficient. Claire said then to Derek, "You found the second partition." Ferrer found it. "He can't open it." She looked at Ferrer for the first time directly. "The same evaluation. Brief complete. You're good." She said most people wouldn't find the seam between the two layers. "It took me a while," he said. And then, because Ferrer was constitutionally honest, "I'm still not sure I fully understand how you structured it." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, a recognition. "I'll open it," she said. "But not yet," she looked at Derek. "First, I need you to understand something. The outer partition is the mission record. 17 operations. Documentation of what they tasked me to do." She paused. "The inner partition is what I found while I was doing it." "What did you find?" Derek asked. She looked at him steadily. "Everything," she said. "I found everything." Derek held her gaze for a long moment. The words sat in the room and expanded into all the space available. Everything. He thought about Stennett. He thought about classified contracts across 3 government agencies. He thought about the kind of network that could locate an asset at sea within 4 hours and destroy their vessel without leaving attribution. He thought about 17 operations over 4 years and the kind of infrastructure required to support that operational tempo invisibly. He thought about the fact that somewhere right now, someone in that network was looking at a status board and seeing a mission marked complete and an asset marked eliminated and believing with the comfortable confidence of powerful people who have always been right before that the story was over. "They think you're dead," Derek said. "Yes. How long do we have before something tells them otherwise?" Claire looked at the rifle. She looked at the ceiling. She did the calculation that Derek understood she had already done many times, probably in the water. Probably in the first cold seconds after the explosion, probably at some point in the 72 hours, when the only thing keeping the calculation running was the fact that she refused to stop running it. "There's a check-in protocol," she said, automated. It pings the recovery team's communication node at irregular intervals to confirm the asset status update. When the node doesn't respond, because the node is at the bottom of the Atlantic, the system flags for manual review. She paused. The flag interval is every 48 hours. "The vessel was destroyed 3 days ago," Derek said, "which means the first flag would have been reviewed approximately 24 hours ago," Claire said. "They would have confirmed the vessel's location via satellite before the destruction. They would have confirmed wreckage afterward. They believe the asset and the module are both gone." She looked at him. "But if anyone in that network has any reason to look at the data trail from this facility, any intercept, any signal, any medical record query that touches my biometric indicators, they'll know you're here," Derek said. "They'll know I survived," she said, "which is considerably worse for them than knowing I'm here because the module they tried to destroy is still intact and the inner partition contains." She stopped. She looked at her hands. She looked at the rifle. She looked back at Derek with an expression that he would not be able to fully describe later in any debrief, because it combined too many things that rarely occupied the same face at the same time. Exhaustion and certainty and something very old underneath both of them that might have been once a long time ago. "Hope, Commander," she said quietly. "The inner partition contains enough to end them, all of them, not Sten. Stennett was one person, one node, I mean the network itself. The infrastructure, the money, the contracts, the names, the operations. Years of it, going back further than I can tell you right now." She paused. "I spent 4 years collecting it while they watched me work and never once suspected that their instrument was also their undoing." The room held that it far looked at the laptop in his hands. Holloway in the doorway had not moved. Derek looked at Claire Mercer, a woman who had been left to die in the North Atlantic 3 days ago by people who believed they had thought of everything and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that she had thought of considerably more. "We need to move fast," he said. "Yes," she said. "We do, And I need to ask you something directly. Ask the organization that sent you, that trained you, that issued those 17 missions. He held her gaze. Are any of them inside this facility's command structure? The questions sat in the air. Claire looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, she said. That's the honest answer. I know names, I know designations, but the network's penetration into NATO structures is one of the things I haven't been able to fully document. She paused. Which is why I told you not to report up the chain. And why I didn't, Derek said. They looked at each other across the room. A naval officer who had made an instinctive call on a rescue helicopter, and a woman who had spent 4 years preparing for a moment that required exactly that kind of instinct. And the understanding between them settled into place like the last piece of a mechanism clicking home. Outside somewhere in the facility's communication systems, a signal was moving. Neither of them knew it yet. But somewhere in a climate-controlled room where men had poured drinks over her death, a status indicator had just changed color and the 48-hour clock had already run out. The signal Farquhar detected did not announce itself. It never did. The kind of people who built systems like this understood that the obvious warning is the one that gets intercepted. And so they had designed something quieter, a passive monitoring thread embedded in the facility's standard communication infrastructure, pulling metadata without touching content, logging access patterns without triggering any of the standard intrusion detection, protocols that NATO facilities ran as a matter of routine. Farrer found it because he was not looking at the content either. He was looking at the architecture. And in the architecture, if you knew what an embedded thread looked like from the outside, it had a particular signature, a rhythm of data requests that was slightly too regular to be organic, slightly too targeted to be ambient system traffic. He found it at 11:47 in the morning, approximately 19 minutes after Dererick left Claire's room the second time. And he found it because he had gone back to the maintenance space to continue working on the inner partition and had out of professional habit run a passive audit on the facility's local network traffic. He stared at his screen for about 4 seconds. Then he picked up the secure radio Derek had left him and pressed the transmit key. Commander, we have a problem. Derek was in the quarter outside Claire's room. He had been standing there making a list in his head. Not on paper, not on any device, because devices could be read of every person in this facility whose access to command communications he could not fully account for. The list was longer than he liked. He raised the radio. Talk to me. There's a monitoring threat in the base network. Passive surveillance, non-intrusive, but it's been active. I don't know exactly what it's collected, but I know it's been running long enough to have picked up biometric data queries, medical intake, possibly identity searches. Derek processed this in approximately 2 seconds. They know she's here. If the thread is reporting in real time, yes. If it's on a delayed transmission cycle, we have a window. I can't tell which without tracing the output node, and tracing it will alert whoever's watching that we found it. Don't trace it, Derek said immediately. Leave it alone. A pause. Sir, if we leave it, if we touch it, they know we know. Right now, we have whatever time they need to mobilize a response team and get them here. The moment we touch that thread, we lose even that. He was already moving. How long, in your best estimate, before a professional recovery team could reach this facility if they scrambled from a position of readiness? Farrer was quiet for a moment. Depending on staging locations, 6 hours minimum, more likely 8 to 12. Dererick checked his watch. 11:51. Then we have until tonight, possibly longer. Start working on the inner partition. I don't care how you do it. I need what's inside that module before anyone arrives. He pushed Claire's door open. She read his face before he opened his mouth. They found the monitoring thread, she said. He stopped. How did you know there was one? Because there's always one, she said. At every NATO facility in this region, there's a passive monitoring thread. It's part of the network maintenance package supplied by a contractor called Helix Systems Integration. The contract was established 11 years ago. She paused. Helix Systems Integration is a subsidiary of a holding company that Sten controlled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You're telling me, Derek said carefully, that the surveillance infrastructure monitoring this facility was built and is maintained by the same network that just tried to kill you. Yes, and you knew this before we brought you in. I suspected it. I couldn't confirm the specific facility without access to the contract records, which are in the inner partition. She looked at him steadily. I'm sorry. I needed to know I could trust you before I gave you information that would change how you made decisions. Derek felt something move through him that was not quite anger and not quite admiration, and sat uncomfortably in the space between them. He pulled the chair close and sat down. He needed to be at eye level for this conversation. He needed both of them to understand that what happened in the next few minutes would determine everything that followed. Claire, he said, I need all of it right now. Not because I'm ordering you, because if there are people coming to this facility and I don't understand what I'm defending against, I cannot protect you. I cannot protect my team, and I cannot protect whatever is in that module. So tell me everything starting from the beginning. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not resistance, but the particular difficulty of a person who has held a truth alone for so long that releasing it feels like a physical act. Then she started talking. She had grown up at the foster care system. That part she gave him in one flat sentence without inflection, because the details were not the point, and she had spent years learning not to give emotional weight to facts that could not be changed. What mattered was what came after. She was 15 when a woman named Hartley, she never knew if that was a first name, a last name, or neither, came to a group home in eastern Pennsylvania and administered a mathematics assessment. Not a standard assessment. Claire knew the difference by then. She had taken enough school tests to understand what standardized evaluation looked like. This was different. This was designed to find a specific kind of mind, the kind that processed spatial relationships and probability distributions and fluid variable calculations. Not as academic exercises, but as natural language, the kind of mind that could look at a problem with 17 moving parts and feel intuitively where the solution lived before working out the formal proof. She scored in a range that Hartley had apparently never recorded before. 3 weeks later, she was in a private facility in Vermont that was described to her as an advanced educational program for gifted youth in foster care. The other students were like her. Smart, mathematically exceptional, and completely alone in the world in the particular way that children become alone when no one has chosen them. For 2 years, it was genuinely educational. Mathematics, physics, computer science, the kind of advanced curriculum that elite universities offered to graduate students. She was good at all of it. She was exceptional at the applied physics components, trajectory, modeling fluid dynamics, the mathematics of objects moving through atmosphere under variable conditions. In her 3rd year, the curriculum changed. They introduced the physical component gradually, she told Derek. First as fitness training, then as coordination and fine motor skill development. Then one afternoon they took us to a range, just a paper range, standard targets at standard distances. They framed it as an applied physics exercise. She stopped. I was very good at it. And they noticed, Derek said. They noticed, she agreed. The others were reassigned to different tracks after that. I was given specialized training one-on-one, a man named Greer, former military. I figured out eventually, though he never confirmed it. He taught me everything about long-range precision work. Not just the mechanics, the mathematics, the atmospheric modeling, the real-time calculation under variable conditions. She paused, and he was honest with me about one thing. He told me that I was being prepared to eliminate people who caused serious harm to innocent people and who operated in spaces where conventional law enforcement couldn't reach them. You believed him, Derek said. It was not a judgment. I was 17, she said, and I had spent my entire life in a system that had never once treated me as though I mattered. And here was someone telling me that my particular abilities could protect people who couldn't protect themselves. A pause. Yes, I believed him. She had been operational by 21. The first several targets were, as far as she could ever verify exactly what she had been told, criminal figures operating in jurisdictions where prosecution was genuinely impossible. Arms traffickers, people who moved money for organizations that killed civilians. She had done her own research after each operation, tracking news reports and intelligence summaries she was given access to as part of her ongoing briefing materials. The targets checked out, and then 2 years in, she received the mission package for a Finnish woman named Ano Mäkinen. The intelligence summary said she was a financial intermediary. Claire said someone who moved money between criminal networks. The photographs showed her at meetings with known figures. She stopped. Her voice stayed controlled, but the control required visible effort. I did my standard Premission research, cross-checking the intelligence against open-source information. It usually confirmed the summary. She paused. This time it didn't. What she had found carefully over 4 days of research, conducted within the narrow parameters of what she was allowed to access, was that Ano Mäkinen was a forensic accountant who had spent 8 years working for a European transparency organization. The Snort's photographs of her at meetings with known figures were real. She had attended those meetings as an investigator. She had been building a case against the financial networks connected to the private defense contractors whose names appeared in her research files. She had 2 children, 7 and 4 years old. I reported a target verification failure, Claire said. Mission protocol. If Premission intelligence cannot be confirmed, the operation is suspended pending review. She looked at her hands. They told me the verification was complete and the operation was proceeding. They overrode you, Derek said. They told me I was misreading the evidence, that my access level didn't give me the full picture, that the meeting context I had found was itself part of the criminal network's cover. She paused, and then Greer came to see me in person, which he had never done before. He sat across from me, and he looked at me, and he said, "You were chosen for this work because of your capabilities, not your judgment. Trust the mission." Something moved through Derek that was old and familiar and deeply uncomfortable. He had heard versions of that speech before. He had even in his younger years believed versions of it. "What did you do?" he asked. "I refused the mission," she said formally in writing. Clear's throat, a beat, and then I ran. What followed was 3 years of survival, living on prepared resources. She had spent 2 years quietly accumulating cash documents, safe locations, because some part of her had understood long before she consciously admitted it to herself that the day would come. Clear's throat, she had moved constantly. She had used her training in ways that had never been intended to be used to stay invisible, to read threats before they materialize, to understand pursuit patterns and stay ahead of them. And she had spent those 3 years collecting every communication she could intercept. Every financial record she could access through the back-channel tools she had maintained access to before her disappearance. Every name, every Clear's throat. Transaction, every contract that connected the network to its operations. She had built the inner partition piece by piece, encrypting each layer herself using a method she had developed it independently over years of working with the mathematics of information security. Stennett, Dererick said, "Tell me about Stennett." Harold Stennett controlled the contracting side of the network. She said, the public face, the legitimate business that provided cover for the financial flows. His contracts with government agencies created the budget lines that funded operations. The money moved through 12 layers of corporate structure before it reached anything that looked like what it actually was. She paused. But more than the money, Sten controlled the documentation. Every operation the network conducted had a paper trail that ran through at least one of his subsidiaries, which meant if you could prove the connection between those subsidiaries and the operations, you could prove the whole structure. And you could prove it, Derek said. I could prove it. She said the evidence is in the inner partition financial records, communications, contract documentation, operational logs that connect Stennett's companies directly to 17 operations over 4 years, and additional operations going back considerably further before I was part of the network. She looked at Derek. I needed to take Stennett out of the system before I could move the evidence forward because as long as he was operational, he had the resources to suppress any investigation within days of its beginning. He had done it before. The Finnish researcher, Derek said quietly. Claire's jaw tightened. Her case file appears in the inner partition. Her investigation was pressed through 3 different government channels within 72 hours of her first official submission. All 3 channels had documented connections to Sten's contracting network. She paused. She is still alive. I confirmed that before I took the shot. Her investigation was killed. She wasn't. Derek absorbed this. You wanted to make sure. I needed to make sure that she was safe, that her children were safe, that the investigation being suppressed hadn't put her in direct danger from other elements of the network. A pause. It hadn't. They considered her neutralized by bureaucratic means. They didn't consider her worth a more direct response. Her voice was flat and precise. I took some comfort in that. Derek looked at this woman, the extraordinary damaged, methodical woman who had been selected at 15 for her mathematical mind, and had spent 20 years becoming the most precisely lethal person he had ever been in a room with, and who had somewhere in those 20 years found a line she would not cross, and had paid a devastating price for refusing to cross it. The shot, he said, 4,000 M. Why that specific operation? Why now? Because I finally had everything I needed, she said. The inner partition was complete. The documentation was sufficient to survive any legal challenge the network could mount. Instead was going to move. He'd received information that someone inside a European transparency organization had been quietly reconstructing Meganin's original research. He was 3 weeks from activating a suppression operation that would have reached considerably further than bureaucratic channels. She looked at Derek. I had a window. I used it. And then they came for you? Within 4 hours. Yes, she paused. I told you I planned for it. 14 seconds, Derek said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. That same non-smile from earlier, but warmer this time by a fraction. I'm good at calculations. Derek leaned forward. The organization that trained you, Greer, Hartley, the people who run the operational side, are they in the inner partition? Completely, she said. Names, designations, financial connections, operational history, the whole architecture. She paused, including the NATO penetration. Derek felt his spine straighten. How deep? 3 confirmed individuals in positions of mid-level command authority within NATO's Northern European operational structure. Their designations are in the partition. Their financial connections to the network are documented. She met his eyes. I don't know if any of them are in this facility specifically. That's the honest answer. But I know the network has visibility into this facility's communication systems through the Helix monitoring thread. And I know that once they confirm I'm alive and the module is intact, they will send someone. They already have. Derek said he made the decision in the same moment he spoke the words. I'm moving you. We're somewhere inside this facility that the monitoring thread can't see, and I'm getting my team together. He stood, and Claire, she looked at him, the inner partition. I need you to open it. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the rifle leaning against the wall. She had that quality again, the calculation running visible in the stillness of her face. There's a prosecutor, she said. Douglas Haynes, federal. He operates outside the defense contracting oversight structure. He's been building a separate case for 3 years on the financial side. He doesn't have what I have, but he's honest and he's not connected to the network. She looked at Derek. If I open the partition here, I need a direct transmission of pathway to hands that bypasses the facility's standard communication infrastructure entirely. Something the monitoring thread can't read. Fairer, Derek said immediately. He can build it. It needs to be clean, encrypted end-to-end with a protocol the thread isn't designed to intercept. Fairer will make it clean, Derek said. Trust me on that. She looked at him steadily. I trusted you when you told Holloway not to separate me from the rifle, she said. I'm still trusting you now. That's a good decision, Derek said. He moved to the door. He had 6 things to do simultaneously, and the discipline not to try to do all of them at once, which was the only reason he had survived 19 years of work that regularly required 6 things simultaneously. He pulled the door open, standing in the corridor approximately 40 ft away, and walking toward him with a clipboard and the relaxed, unhurried stride of a man who had every right to be exactly where he was a man Derek did not recognize. Facility personnel wore their ID badges on the left chest. standard positioning. Derek had looked at every badge in every corridor he'd walked today with the automatic unconscious attention of someone trained to read details without appearing to read them. This man's badge was on his right chest. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that meant nothing to 99 people in a 100. Derek did not move for 2 seconds. He kept his face completely neutral. He let his eyes track past the man and back again as though he had glanced at him and moved on. Then he stepped back into Claire's room and quietly closed the door. "We're moving now," he said. "Not in 5 minutes now." Claire was already reaching for the rifle. She had read his face before he finished the sentence. In the quarter outside, footsteps approached at the unhurried pace of a man who believed he had not been identified. And the last quiet hour of this facility's ordinary day was ending with a silence that neither of them would remember afterward, because everything that followed happened very fast. Derek moved with the economy of someone who had rehearsed emergency relocation in his head 1,000 times without knowing the specific scenario. He didn't run. Running was a signal. He walked at the pace of a man who had somewhere to be and knew exactly where that was, which happened to be true. He keyed his radio on the team channel. 1 click, then 2, then 1. The pattern meant consolidate on my position. No radio chatter now. He had Claire moving 3 seconds after he closed the door. She had the rifle slung across her back in a carry configuration that told him she had done this before. Not the panicked grab of someone in crisis, but the practiced, efficient movement of someone for whom relocating under threat was a trained skill. She moved quietly. She moved fast. She did not ask where they were going. He appreciated that more than he could have articulated. The man with the badge on the wrong side was still 40 FT away. When Derek turned Claire down a side corridor toward the facility's secondary mechanical wing, he did not look back. Looking back was information you gave to someone who was watching. He kept his pace steady and counted footsteps and listened. Behind him, the footsteps in the main corridor did not accelerate. Good. Not yet confirmed, still operating on schedule. He had maybe 8 minutes before that changed. Holloway materialized at the junction of the mechanical corridor like a man who had been standing there his whole life. He read Derek's posture and said nothing. He fell in beside them, and the 3 of them moved together into the secondary wing, where the facility's heating and electrical infrastructure lived in a constant low hum that swallowed small sounds and made surveillance considerably more difficult. Ferrer was already there. Martinez was behind him. Reyes came through a separate access door 30 seconds later, slightly out of breath, which for Reyes meant he had been moving very quickly because Reyes did not breathe hard easily. "We've got company," Derek said. He kept his voice low, and even one confirmed inside the facility. "Badge placement wrong, right chest instead of left. There may be others using legitimate credentials. I don't know how deep the infiltration of staff access goes." He looked at each of his people in turn. "We are not initiating contact. We are not alerting facility command. We are going to assume that at least one person in the command structure here is compromised until we know otherwise, which means we are operating on our own judgment until the situation is resolved." Martinez said rules of engagement. Protect the asset in the module. Minimum force. Nobody fires unless there is an immediate and direct threat. He paused. These are professionals. They will not want a confrontation that generates documentation and witnesses. They will try to create an isolated situation. Clear's throat. We don't give them one. Reyes looked at Claire. He was trying not to be obvious about it and not entirely succeeding. "What exactly are we protecting?" Claire answered before Derek could. "Evidence sufficient to dismantle a shadow network that has been running covert operations under government contract cover for over a decade. Financial records, operational logs, names, and documented connections to 17 confirmed operations in 4 years." She met Reyes' eyes. "If that module doesn't reach a federal prosecutor in the next several hours, every person connected to those operations walks free permanently. The network closes the gaps, burns the paper trails, and rebuilds under new structures." She paused. "That is what you're protecting." Reyes looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Derek, "I'm in," he said as though there had been any question. "Fairer," Derek said. "The transmission pathway to hands. Where are we?" "I can build it," Fairer said. "Air-gapped relay through the facility's emergency satellite uplink. It's a separate system from the main communication info structure designed for use when primary comms are down. The Helix monitoring thread won't be watching it because it was installed 6 years before the Helix contract, and it's not part of the network architecture the thread maps." He paused. "I need 40 minutes to configure the encryption protocol." "You have 25, Derek said. Fairer looked at him. "Commander 25, Derek said not unkindly, just precisely. "Start now." Fairer started now. Derek turned to Claire. "The inner partition. You open it the moment Fairer has the pathway ready, not before." He looked at her. "Is there anything in that partition that changes what I need to know about the people coming for us tonight?" She thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Yes," she said, "one thing." She shifted the rifle on her shoulder. "The recovery team the network uses for asset elimination. They're called internally by a designator I've only seen referenced in communications as Vantage. I've never been able to identify individual members, but their operational signature is consistent across 7 previous recovery operations I've documented. They move in cells of 4. They always have an inside contact who does pre-operation reconnaissance. The man with the badge was almost certainly Vantage reconnaissance, and they do not attempt extraction. Their mandate is termination and retrieval of materials. The room processed this termination and retrieval. Holloway said he said it the way you repeat a phrase when you want to make absolutely certain you have heard it correctly. They are not coming to arrest me. Claire said they are coming to confirm that I am dead and to recover the module. She looked at Derek. The man in the corridor was mapping your team's positions and confirming my location. They will know within the next hour where I am and how many of you there are. Then we change where you are, Derek said immediately. He looked at Martinez. The storage room at the northeast corner of this wing. It's got one entry point external hole on 2 sides, and it's not on any facility map I've seen because it was added during a renovation that predates the current management structure. Martinez nodded. I know it. Move her there. Stay with her. Holloway, you're with them. He looked at Reyes. You and I are going to take a walk through the main facility corridors and let whoever is doing reconnaissance get a look at us moving normally. Give them something to track that isn't this room. Clear's throat Reyes understood immediately. Draw their eye for the next 20 minutes, long enough for Fairer to finish and for Claire to open the partition. He looked at Fairer. The moment the pathway is live, you come get me. I don't care where I am. Fairer was already working. He raised one hand briefly in acknowledgement and didn't look up. Derek looked at Claire one more time before Martinez moved her. There was something he needed to say and not much time to say it in. And he chose directness because directness was what the moment called for. You've been alone with this for 3 years, he said quietly. She met his eyes. You're not alone with it anymore, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved in her face, that same deep, complex movement he had seen before in her hospital room when he had told her he'd already given the order she was about to ask for the movement of a person encountering something they had stopped expecting to encounter. Go draw their eye, Commander, she said. Her voice was steady. I'll be here when you get back, he went. The next 23 minutes were the particular kind of tense that doesn't show on the outside. Derek and Reyes moved it through the facility's main corridors at an unhurried pace, speaking to each other in the low conversational register of 2 colleagues, with nothing urgent on their minds. Derek told a story about a training exercise in Norway that was almost entirely fictional. Reyes responded with appropriate timing. They were performing normally with the precision of men who understood that the performance itself was the operational task. Derek spotted 2 more. The first was a woman near the facility's administrative section, reviewing a wall-mounted formational display with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone reading information they don't care about while monitoring a space they do care about. Her credentials looked correct at distance. Her positioning was wrong. She had chosen a spot that gave her sight lines to 3-quarter junctions simultaneously. Nobody reads a wall display from that specific location unless they've mapped the sight lines first. The second was a man in medical staff, clothing near the facility's main entrance, having a conversation on a mobile phone. Snorts, the conversation looked casual. His body language was not. His weight was distributed forward toward the balls of his feet in the way of someone whose body is maintaining low-level readiness while the face performs relaxation. 4-person cell, 1 inside doing reconnaissance, 2 holding positions in the main facility. 1 Derek estimated outside managing approach routes and exit logistics. They were not moving yet. They were watching, waiting for confirmation of position and team strength before they committed. He had time, not much, but some. His radio clicked once, twice, once. Fairer, he looked at Rays. "Walk back slowly," he said. "Don't change pace." They turned at the next junction and took the long route back to the mechanical wing, and Derek used every second of it to finalize the picture in his head. 4 trained professionals against his team of 5 plus CLA. The facility security staff were an unknown, potentially compromised at the command level, potentially loyal but uninformed, certainly not briefed on what was actually happening in their building tonight. He could not rely on them. He could not alert them. He could not explain to facility command what was occurring without risking the transmission going to exactly the wrong person. He was going to have to handle this with the 5 people who already knew and Claire. He pushed back into the mechanical wing. Fairer was standing with his laptop, his expression carrying the specific quality of a man who has just finished something difficult and is not entirely certain he should feel proud of it. "It's live." Farrar said, "Emergency satellite uplink custom encryption, clears throat, routed through a relay I configured to look like standard maintenance telemetry. The Helix thread is looking at it right now and seeing scheduled system diagnostics." Derek gripped his shoulder once. "Good work. I need 15 minutes to verify the connection is stable at the receiving end before we transmit anything sensitive." "You have 10, Derek said. "Where's Claire?" Martinez appeared at the interior doorway. "Northeast room, she's ready." Derek walked through. The room was small and concrete and lit by a single overhead fixture that Martinez had switched to emergency mode, giving everything a flat, even quality. Holloway was near the door. Martinez moved back inside after Derek entered. Claire was standing in the center of the room with the rifle in her hands, not in a carry configuration now, but properly held, which told Derek that somewhere in the last 23 minutes, her route of the situation had shifted from operational readiness to something closer to immediate. 3 of them insidied the facility, he said, 1 outside minimum. They're holding position, still in reconnaissance phase. They're waiting for a communication window, Claire said. Vantage doesn't commit until the cell leader confirms the target's exact position and the extraction route is clear. The man in the corridor reported back. "They're planning the approach now." She looked at Derek, 40 minutes, maybe less. "Farrar needs 10 more minutes on the pathway, then we have 30, she said. "That's workable." Holloway looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. "Been on the other side of a Vantage operation twice," she said. "I survived both times because I understood their methodology better than they expected Clear's throat. An asset to understand it." She paused. "They're very good, but they're optimized for targets who don't know they're coming. Tonight, that advantage is inverted." Martinez said quietly, "You're calm." It was not an accusation. It was an observation offered with something that sounded like genuine curiosity. The curiosity of a man who had seen a great many people in threatening situations and had developed an accurate sense of what calm actually looked like versus what performed calm looked like. Claire looked at him. "I've been calculating the variables on a scenario like this for 3 years." She said, "The uncertainty is over. Whatever happens in the next few hours, I know the shape of it. Uncertainty is harder than danger." She paused, "At least for me." Martinez nodded slowly. He looked like a man who understood that answer more than he expected to. Farrar's voice came through Derek's radio. "Pathway is stable, ready when you are." Derek looked at Claire. "Open it." She reached into the rifle stock. A specific pressure point on the composite base that required knowing exactly where to press a detail that would have taken Farquhar another several hours to locate independently in a small panel released with a sound like a breath. She removed the data module. She sat down on the floor cross-legged with the laptop Farrer had carried in, and she worked for 4 minutes in complete silence. The room watched her. She did not appear to be under any pressure. She worked with the focused, even attention of a person doing something they have done many times before. Something their hands know even when their mind is tracking other things simultaneously. Derrick watched her fingers on the keyboard and thought about a 15-year-old girl in a group home in Pennsylvania who had been found by a woman named Hartley because her mind worked in a way that made her useful to people with resources and no conscience. And he felt something old and heavy settle into place somewhere in his chest. "It's open," she said. She turned the laptop to face him. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. Column after column of financial data, names he recognized and names he didn't. And names that he recognized in the way you recognize a shape in the dark. Not clearly, but with the sense that clarity was going to be very uncomfortable when it arrived. Contract numbers, communication records, dates that connected directly to events he knew about from official briefings and official histories and official explanations that were he now understood constructed specifically to prevent anyone from connecting the dates to the events correctly. "Farrer," he said. Farrer leaned over and looked at the screen. He straightened up. He looked at Derrick. He looked at the screen again. "Commander," he said, "I count 19 government contract designations in this first column alone. 3 of them," he stopped. He pointed at the screen. He seemed to be having difficulty completing the sentence. "Say it," Derrick said. 3 of them are active contracts," Farrer said. "Currently funded, currently operational," he paused. "This network isn't historical, it's running right now." The room went very still. Claire said, "That's why the timeline mattered. That's why I needed Stennett removed before the transmission. He was the authorization point for 2 of those 3 active contracts. Without his authorization, the funding flows freeze within 72 hours and the operational structures that depend on them go dark." She paused. "The 3rd active contract runs through a separate authorization chain. That name is also in the partition." "Who?" Derrick said. She reached over and scrolled. She stopped on a name. Derrick read it. He read it twice. He looked at Farrer. Farrer's face had gone the particular color of someone who has just connected a set of dots they genuinely did not want to connect. "Start the transmission," Derrick said. His voice was very quiet and very clear. "Everything, all of it to hands now." "It'll take 12 to 15 minutes to transmit the full petition," Farrer said. He was already moving. "Then start 12 minutes ago," Derrick said. Farrer sat down beside Claire and began the transmission process, and Claire watched him work with the careful attention of someone who has trusted only themselves for 3 years and is learning in real time what it feels like to trust someone else. 8 minutes into the transmission, Holloway's hand went to his earpiece. He listened for 2 seconds. He looked at Derrick. "Movement," he said. "Main quarter junction. Martinez's secondary camera just picked up 2 individuals moving away from their holding positions." "They're committing," Derrick said. 12 minutes, Farrer said without looking up. "I need 12 minutes. You have however long we can give you," Derrick said. He looked at Holloway. He looked at Martinez. He looked at Reyes, who had positioned himself near the door with a particular quality of readiness that looks indistinguishable from stillness to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. "Nobody gets through that door until the transmission is complete," Derrick said. "Nobody." "Understood," Holloway said. And then Claire stood up. She slung the rifle. She moved to a position near the rear wall. Not the door, not the center, but a specific location that Derrick realized after a moment had been chosen, because it gave her a sight line through a narrow gap in the door frame to the corridor outside, while keeping her body behind solid concrete. She had mapped the room when she arrived. Of course she had. "They'll try the door first," she said quietly, testing the lock. "If it holds, they move to Plan B, which in Vantage protocol is a distraction event in another part of the facility. Something that requires the team inside to split their attention." She paused. Don't split your attention. We won't, Derek said. When the distraction happens, keep everyone on the door. She looked at him. The real approach comes from the distraction side. That's the Vantage signature. The distraction is the approach. Derek looked at Reyes. Reyes nodded. He had understood. 7 minutes remaining on the transmission. The door handle moved slowly, almost imperceptibly. The kind of movement that a person not paying attention would attribute to the building settling to a draft to any of the small mechanical sounds that institutional buildings make in the night. Derek's team paid attention. The handle moved a fraction of an inch and stopped. The lock held. Silence, then from somewhere in the distant section of the facility, a sound. Something falling, something breaking. The kind of sound that pulls the human attention automatically, instinctively, because the human nervous system is wired to respond to unexpected sounds as potential threats. Nobody in the room moved toward it. Claire watched the door, 4 minutes remaining. 3-2 Commander. Farr's voice was controlled and careful and carried the weight of something very significant. The transmission is complete. Haynes has confirmed receipt. He looked up. It's done. Derek let out one breath. One. Then he was moving. Light them up, he said on the team channel. All positions. Nobody comes through and nobody leaves until this facility is locked down. We have authorization to hold all unidentified personnel pending verification. He paused. Move. What followed was not a firefight. It was a containment. The distinction mattered because a firefight has a chaotic grammar that produces casualties on both sides and documentation that is very difficult to manage afterward. A containment conducted by 5 trained operators who knew the building and knew the positions of their targets, and had the particular advantage of having received confirmation that the evidence was already beyond anyone's ability to destroy, is something considerably more controlled. The first Vantage operator was intercepted in the eastern quarter by Martinez and Holloway together. He was fast and technically excellent, and in different circumstances against a different team he would have been very dangerous. Against Martinez and Holloway working together, he had approximately 6 seconds of active resistance before the geometry of the situation resolved itself in their favor. The second was found near the facility's communication room, trying Derek, realized to access the primary communication infrastructure trying to transmit something trying to report. Reyes reached him before he completed the connection. The third, the woman from the administrative section, simply walked away. She moved toward the facility's secondary exit with the calm, unhurried pace of someone who has assessed the situation and made a professional decision. Derek let her go. He needed her to carry the message back. He needed the network to understand what had happened here tonight. He needed them to know that the transmission had been made and confirmed, and that there was nothing left to retrieve because the truth was no longer in this building. The fourth, the one outside, was gone before anyone reached the perimeter. Vantage protocol. Claire told him later, the external position always withdraws the moment the interior operation fails. No communication, no coordination, automatic. At 4:17 in the morning, the facility's secondary wing was quiet. Derek walked back to the northeast room. The door was open. Ferrer was sitting with his laptop looking at the screen with the expression of a man who keeps reading the same line because he can't quite believe what it says. Martinez was near the wall. Holloway was in the corridor. Claire was standing exactly where she had been standing. The rifle was still in her hands. She had not fired a single round. She looked at Derek when he came through the door. He looked at her. It's done, he said. The transmission went through. Haynes has everything. Your 3 inside contacts are detained pending verification. The cell withdrew. He paused. It's done, Claire. She looked at the rifle in her hands. She looked at it for a long moment. The way you look at something that has been part of you for so long. You have to consciously remember that it is a separate object. Then she looked at Derek. Is it enough? She asked, not the evidence. She knew the evidence was enough. She meant something else. She meant, does it count? Does it reach? Does it matter that she had done it this way with this cost across these years? Derek thought about the name on the screen, the active contracts, the financial records, the 17 operations, the Finnish researcher who was alive and whose children were 7 and 4 years old. It's enough, he said. She nodded once. Outside, through the walls of a military facility on the edge of the Arctic, the first pale suggestion of dawn was beginning to move across the horizon. And somewhere in Washington, a federal prosecutor named Douglas Haynes had just received the largest single package of documented evidence in the history of a case he had been building alone for 3 years. And his phone was already ringing with a call he would later describe as the moment he understood that the case was no longer his alone to carry. The night had come for her. It had not been enough. Douglas Haynes had not slept. That was not unusual. In 3 years of building a case that most of his colleagues considered professionally suicidal, he had developed a relationship with sleep that could be generously described as complicated. But the kind of awake he was at 4:23 in the morning on a Tuesday in January was different from the ordinary sleeplessness of a man who carries too much unresolved work to bed with him. This was the awake of someone whose phone had just received an encrypted data package of a size that his secure terminal's reception confirmation, logged as the largest single transmission the system had ever processed. He sat at his desk in his home office in Alexandria, Virginia, and he read the first 30 pages of what the partition contained. And then he stopped reading and sat very still for approximately 2 minutes. And then he picked up his phone and called a number he had memorized 18 months ago and never used because the conditions for using it had never been exactly right. The conditions were exactly right. Now. The man who answered on the second ring was a senior investigator with the Office of the Inspector General, who had been building a parallel financial case from the outside of the same network that Haynes had been approaching from the inside, and whose clears throat. Name does not matter for the purposes of this story, except to say that when Haynes told him what he had just received. The man was silent for 11 seconds before he said, "How solid is it?" "Airtight," Haynes said. "Every document has a corresponding verification chain. The financial records cross-reference against publicly available contract data. The communication logs have metadata that can be independently authenticated." He paused. "This isn't intelligence. This is evidence, court-ready defense proof, undeniable evidence." Another silence. "Then where did it come from?" "A woman," Haynes said, "in Iceland." He paused. "I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to help me build a wall around this before anyone with the authority to suppress it realizes it exists." The next 4 hours were the fastest 4 hours Douglas Haynes had ever experienced professionally. Calls made in careful sequence, documents secured in systems that operated under separate authorization structures, copies transmitted to 3 locations simultaneously so that no single suppression action could reach all of them. A sealed filing with a federal court that created a legal record of the evidence's existence at a specific date and time. A record that could not be uncreated without generating documentation of the attempt. By 8:00 in the morning, the evidence was behind more walls than the network could breach in the time available to them. By 9, the first formal investigative referrals had been issued. By 10:02, the 3 NATO officers named in the partition's documentation of network penetration had been placed on administrative hold pending security review and action taken by a NATO internal affairs structure that operated independently of the compromised command chain, reached through a contact Haynes had spent 18 months cultivating specifically for a moment like this. The network was not dead yet. Networks like this do not die quickly. They are too distributed, too layered, too accustomed to operating in the spaces between official structures to collapse at the first sign of pressure. But they are not invulnerable to evidence. And what Claire Mercer had built inside that partition was not a wound the network could close. It was a fracture running through the entire foundation, and fractures of that kind do not heal. They spread. In Iceland, Derrick heard about the NATO holds through a secure channel that Farkar had established with a contact in the Alliance's Internal Affairs Division. He read the message twice and then walked to the room where Claire was sitting with a cup of coffee that Tors had brought her 40 minutes ago and had apparently not yet touched. She was looking at the wall. She did this sometimes. Derrick had noticed it over the past several hours. This quality of stillness that was not absence, but the opposite of absence of focused internal processing that ran behind her eyes while her face stayed quiet. "The first two NATO officers are on hold," Dererick said. She looked at him. "Which two?" He told her the designations. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the release of a tension so long held that its absence registered as a physical change. "The third," she said. "Not yet," Derek said. "Hans is working on that authorization chain separately. It's more complex." She nodded. She already knew why. The third name was the one that had made Derek's hand go still on the table when he read it. The third name operated at a level where administrative holds required coordination between four separate oversight bodies, each of which had to be approached in sequence, and without alerting the others to the approach. Because the third name had people inside each of those bodies who would report the movement upward before the hold could be finalized. The third name was why the network had survived for over a decade. "Hayes will get there," Dererick said. "I know," she said. She picked up the coffee. She looked at it as though she had forgotten it was there. She drank some. She set it down. "Commander, I need to tell you something." He pulled a chair close and sat down. He had learned over the past several hours that, when Claire said she needed to tell him something, the correct response was to create the conditions for her to say it at the pace that worked for her because she did not waste words, and she did not build up to things with unnecessary preamble. And if she was framing it as something she needed to say rather than simply saying it, the thing itself required a moment of its own. "Ferrer found the second partition," she said. Derek was still. "We know about the second partition. That's what we transmitted." "No," she said, "found the second partition." "I opened the second partition." She looked at him steadily. "There is a third. The room absorbed this the way a room absorbs a sound that doesn't quite fit the context of beat of pure processing before the meaning arrives." "A third partition," Derek said. "Yes, inside the module. Yes." He looked at her. He thought about Ferrer saying the module had more space inside than the outer partition used. He thought about a woman who had spent 4 years building evidence inside a network that believed it controlled her completely. He thought about the particular quality of her mathematics, the way every calculation she made had at least one layer beyond what the situation appeared to require. "What's in it?" he said. She set the coffee down. She looked at her hands. She looked at the rifle leaning against the wall beside her, her constant, the one physical object that had traveled with her through everything that she had held against her chest in the North Atlantic, while her body made its final negotiations with survival. "The 17 operations in the outer partition," she said. "Those are the operations I conducted, tasks supported, confirmed by the network." She paused. "The inner partition contains the operations I documented during my 3 years outside the network. Financial records, communications, contract, connections, everything I collected while I was running. We transmitted all of that," Dererick said. "Yes," she said. "But the third partition," she stopped. She organized the words carefully, the way she organized everything precisely efficiently without waste. "The third partition contains operations that predate my involvement with the network by a significant margin. Documented operations going back 22 years. Names, methods, financial records, official investigations that were suppressed, whistleblowers who disappeared, journalists who died in circumstances that were ruled accidental." She paused. "I didn't collect this. It was given to me." Derek felt the cold move through him again. "By who?" "By Greer," she said. The name landed. Greer, the man who had trained her. The man who had sat across from her and told her to trust the mission and not her judgment. The man who represented in the architecture of her history, the person who had most completely shaped what she became and the person whose instruction she had ultimately refused to follow. "Greer gave you this," Derek said slowly. 2 years ago," she said. "I was in Helsinki. I'd been in the city for 3 days and I was already planning to move. He found me." She paused. "I had a weapon on him within 4 seconds of understanding who was at my door. He didn't try to prevent it." He sat down. He put a data drive on the table between us. He said, "This is what I should have given you before you left." She looked at Derek. He said he had been collecting it for 9 years since before I came into the program. He had always known what the network actually was. He had stayed because he believed for a long time that the targets were worth the compromise. She stopped. And then there was a target that wasn't worth the compromise, and he couldn't sanction it, and he couldn't stop it, and he couldn't leave and still protect the people he cared about. So he stayed and he collected. What target? Derek asked, though part of him already knew the shape of the answer. Machen Claire, said Button, the Finnish researcher. He flagged her file to me knowing what my response would be. He needed someone to refuse because he couldn't refuse alone. He didn't have the operational standing, but an asset refusal formally documented created a record inside the network's own system, a record that existed that could be found. She paused. He needed me to be the line that the network crossed so the crossing would be documented. Derek sat with this for a long moment. The weight of it was considerable. The particular weight of understanding that a situation you thought you understood has a dimension you hadn't seen, and that the dimension changes the moral geometry of everything that came before. He used you, Derek said carefully, not as an accusation, as a fact that required acknowledgement. Yes, Claire said, he used me and I am still deciding how I feel about that, and I expect I will be deciding for a long time. She paused. But what he gave me is real. 22 years of documented operations, the true origin of the network, the names of the people who built it, who funded its first decade, who established the contracting infrastructure that Stennett later ran. She looked at Derek. The inner partition gave Hans enough to break the current network. The third partition gives him enough to understand how it was built and why, and who decided 2 decades ago that this was something worth building. The third partition needs to go to Hans. Derek said, I transmitted it 11 minutes ago. Claire said, while you were reading the NATO hold message, Farrer's pathway was still live. I used it. Derek looked at her. She met his gaze without apology and without performance. Just the steady, clear-eyed look of a person who had made a decision that was correct and knew it was correct and did not need external validation for the knowledge. You could have told me first, Derek said. Yes, she agreed. I could have, and if I had told you first. You would have wanted to verify the pathway security again, and you would have wanted to review the content of the third partition before transmission, and both of those things would have taken time that I calculated we did not have. She paused. The third partition names the third NATO officer directly. The moment that name moves through any system in this facility that the monitoring thread touches, the network knows what we have. The transmission needed to happen before anyone in this building knew it existed. Derek sat with this. He breathed slowly. He thought about what it meant that this woman had within the hour following the most operationally intense night of her past 3 years. Quietly made the calculation that ended the network's last viable option for containment, and executed that calculation without involving him, and was now explaining it to him not because she needed his approval, but because she considered him worth explaining it to. Farrer's going to be annoyed that you used his pathway without telling him, Derek said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Real this time, actual and warm. I'll apologize to him, she said. He won't believe it, Derek said, but he'll appreciate it. He looked at her. Greer, where is he? Her expression shifted, not closed. She didn't close. He had noticed that she processed things visibly rather than shutting them away, but careful. I don't know, she said. He gave me the drive. He told me what it contained. He told me to use it when the time was right, and not before, because the third partition is only useful after the current network structure is compromised. Otherwise, the names in it are protected by the same mechanisms that protect the network. She paused. Then he left. I haven't heard from him since. Do you think he's alive? A long pause. She looked at the rifle. I think Greer is the kind of person who survives because he understands better than almost anyone the cost of being found. I think he is somewhere doing exactly what he has always done, watching and collecting and waiting for the moment when what he has collected is needed. She paused. I think someday he will find his own moment. And when he does, I think it will matter. Derek nodded. He stood, he walked to the window not to look out, but because the room needed movement and he needed the 3 seconds of movement to organize what came next into something manageable. His radio clicked. Farrer's voice. Commander Haynes just sent a confirmation on the third petition. A pause. And in the pause, Derek heard something that Farrer controlled precise. Professionally, unemotional Farrer was working to keep out of his voice and not entirely succeeding. He says the third partition changes the scope of the investigation significantly. He's requesting authorization to elevate to a joint task force with DOJ involvement, and another pause. He says the word he keeps using is historic. Derek looked at Claire. She was looking at the rifle again. She did this, he had come to understand, not out of attachment to the object itself, but because the rifle was the through-line of the entire story. The thing she had been found holding. The thing that had carried the truth, the thing that had connected where she had come from to where she had arrived. Looking at it was a way of looking at the whole of it. Tell Hans yes. Derek said into the radio, tell him whatever authorization he needs. He has it, tell him. He stopped. He thought about the right words. Tell him the woman who built it says use all of it. Farrer was quiet for a second. Yes, sir. The radio clicked off. Claire looked up from the rifle. She looked at Derek. For the first time since Holloway had pulled her from the water, her face was fully open. Not the evaluation, not the calculation, not the controlled processing, just her face. Whatever was underneath the 3 years of running, and the 4 years before that, of working inside a structure that had used her extraordinary mind to do things that a woman named Hartley had identified when she was 15 years old that her extraordinary mind could be made to do. What happens now, she said. Her voice was quiet, not afraid, just asking. Now, Derek said, you have to talk to a lot of people you're not going to like talking to. Investigators, prosecutors, intelligence oversight personnel, people who are going to ask you questions you've answered 100 times and will need you to answer 101 times in formats and context and under conditions that are going to be frustrating. He paused. And through all of that, you're going to have to trust a process that hasn't always earned that trust. She was quiet for a moment, and I'll be around. Derek said, my team and I have our own set of very uncomfortable conversations ahead of us about why we held evidence, isolated a survivor, and ran an unauthorized operation inside a NATO facility without notifying command. He paused. I expect that will be an interesting series of meetings. You followed your judgment, she said. I did, he said. I'd do it again. She looked at him steadily. So would I, she said. For the record, Tors appeared in the doorway. His expression was the expression of someone who has been monitoring a situation from the periphery and has just received information he is not sure how to deliver. Commander, there's a call coming through the secure terminal. It's being routed through Haynes' office. He paused. They're saying it's the Deputy Attorney General. Derek looked at Tors. He looked at Claire. He looked at the rifle against the wall. He thought about a helicopter crew seeing something impossible in the water. He thought about Holloway going into the freezing Atlantic and finding eyes that opened and evaluated him in the middle of the ocean. He thought about a maintenance room and a number that silenced a room full of trained operators, and a name that made his hand go still on a table. He thought about 14 seconds in one round and 4,112 m, and a woman who had calculated in the middle of all of it that she would survive. She had always been right about the math. Tell them we'll call back in 10 minutes, Derek said. He looked at Claire. You should clean up first. You're about to talk to someone important, and you've been wearing the same clothes for 4 days. Something that had been building behind her eyes slowly across the past several hours as the evidence moved, and the walls went up, and the network began its first irreversible fractures broke through the surface. Not tears, something deeper than tears. The particular release of a person who has held an enormous weight alone for so long that the moment other hands reach for it produces a physical response that the body enacts without asking permission. She laughed. It was a short, surprised, genuine laugh. The laugh of someone who did not know they still had that sound in them and was slightly astonished by its presence. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it was gone, and she was composed again, and she was looking at Derek with an expression that would have been on a different face in a different life, much simpler to name. 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes, he confirmed. She stood. She reached for the rifle automatic, the gesture of a person whose hand has moved to the same place 10,000 times. Then she stopped. She looked at it. She looked at Derek. "Can you hold this?" she said, "while I clean up." She held the rifle out. Derek took it. He had held a great many weapons in his career. He had held them in training and in operations and in the dark, and in the cold and under conditions that required him to understand completely and without reservation what a weapon was, and what it was for, and what it cost to use it correctly. He had never held one that felt like this. It felt like evidence. It felt like testimony. It felt like 20 years of a person's life compressed into 4,112 meters of precise, unforgiving mathematics. And at the end of all of it, an answer that was simultaneously an ending and a beginning, which is the only kind of answer that ever actually matters. Claire walked out of the room. Derek stood with the rifle in his hands and listened to the facility resuming its ordinary sounds around him. Footsteps, distant voices, the mechanical rhythms of a building that did not yet know what had passed through it in the night. And he thought about what she had said to him in the first hour after they brought her in. "You pulled me out of the ocean, Commander. I'm going to try very hard to make sure that doesn't get you killed." She had kept that promise. He thought about Haynes and Alexandria reading the third partition at his desk, and using the word historic and making calls in the dark. He thought about the 2 NATO officers on administrative hold, and the third one whose authorization, Shane Haynes, was navigating with the care of someone who understood that this particular door once opened would not close again. He thought about Eno Machinen in Finland alive, whose investigation had been killed by bureaucratic means 11 years ago, and whose work was about to be retrieved from the archive of things the network believed it had successfully buried. He thought about a 15-year-old girl in a group home in Pennsylvania whose mathematics teacher had probably noticed something and filed no reports, and a woman named Hartley who had noticed the same thing and filed every report in the particular cruelty of systems that identify extraordinary capacity, and immediately began calculating how to use it for purposes the person carrying that capacity never agreed to. He thought about what it means to be an instrument, and what it means to refuse, and what it hunts, and what it ultimately produces when the refusal is principled, and the person refusing is willing to carry the cost for as long as it takes, and to calculate with the same extraordinary mind that made them useful in the first place. The precise moment when the cost becomes something the world can actually receive. 4,112 m 68 seconds. 1 round. But that was never the whole story. The shot was the last calculation in a sequence that had begun the day. A woman sat across a table from a 15-year-old girl and saw something she decided to exploit and had run through every decision that followed every mission accepted, and every mission refused, every record logged, and every record hidden. Claire's throat, every kilometer traveled in 3 years of running towards something that looked from the outside like running away. The storm she had brought back from the ocean was not the evidence alone. It Claire's throat was the entirety of what she had chosen to be in the face of everything that had tried to make her into something else. When Claire Mercer walked back into the room 7 minutes later, she looked at Derek with the rifle still in his hands, and she looked at Farrer at his terminal, and she looked at Holloway in the doorway and Martinez against the wall, and she said nothing for a moment because the moment did not require words. Then she straightened. She held out her hand for the rifle. Derek gave it back. She slung it across her shoulder. She looked at the door. She looked at Derek. "Ready," she said, and in that single word, in the voice of a woman who had been left to die in the North Atlantic, and had come back carrying the storm, there was no performance, no relief, no drama, just the clean, absolute certainty of someone who has finished one calculation and is prepared without hesitation to begin the next. She walked out, and the truth walked with her, not because it needed her protection anymore, but because she had earned the right to be the one who carried it into the